Eve Rodsky. Welcome to the Motherly Podcast.
Oh, Liz, I'm so really happy to be here. We hadn't met before, but our communities are so aligned in our messaging, and so I'm just bursting with happiness to finally get to meet you.
Well, thanks for joining us. So, I always like to start with reflecting on who we are as women before and after motherhood. So I'm curious for you, when you think back to first-time motherhood, what about it surprised you?
Such a good question. Well, I think what surprised me, Liz, was the complete erasure of Eve Rodsky, or Eve Madison at the time. I had already erased, I guess, the Madison because I didn't really think about what it was like to lose my name. But what I think about in the transition to motherhood now, because people are often asking me the same way that my first book, Fair Play, sort of starts with this blueberries breakdown. My husband sending me a text that says, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." And then what happened to me in my life after I realized I no longer wanted to be the fulfiller of his smoothie needs. This book, people ask me, was there a time where you thought you wanted to write about women's identity, creativity, fun, and the intersection of their happiness and meaning and all these different interesting questions? And what I remember is right after Zach, who's 13, my first son, was given to me, because you're asking about the transition to motherhood. Mm-hmm. I remember that was the first time where someone didn't use my name. I remember the labor and delivery nurse, she handed me Zach and said, "Hi, Mom." And then I remember I had a friend, because those charms were really in, that, those little charms were in. I had a friend come to me at the hospital that week, and she gave me a mom necklace, and I remember putting that on proudly. And then cut to being in my son's toddler transition program, where of course there's all mothers and a couple of gay fathers, because God forbid they would ask fathers to be there, right? Our time is infinite like sand, and men's time is finite like diamonds. And so I'm sitting around this group, and I remember I'm wearing this name tag, and the name tag said Zach's mom. And this preschool teacher says, "Look around. You're going to be with these people for 10 years. These are going to be your best friends in the entire world. They're going to know you better than anyone." And we're sort of looking around and sort of awkwardly smiling at each other. And I have Zach, sort of bouncing in my lap. And then I remember thinking, wait, these are the people who are going to know me better than anybody else in the world? They don't even know my fucking name. And that was my transition to parenthood, understanding that once I became a mother, it was societally acceptable and actually more societally preferable for me to lose myself in my identities as a parent and our partner and our professional, and actually lose my name as well.
When did you become conscious of that, right? Because your oldest is a teenager. Even 15 years ago, 10 years ago, parenting culture was a bit different. So what part of this journey for you did you realize, I have been consumed by this identity and I'm not happy? What was that for you?
Well, we didn't have Motherly back then, so I'm sad I didn't, right? 13, almost 14 years ago was a different culture. What to expect when you're expecting was, all I knew was that my child was supposed to be a fucking jelly bean. I don't really know if I learned anything else about that book. I certainly didn't know how to ask for what I needed, or to understand that 2/3 or more of what it took to run a home and family was going to fall on me. There was a lot of surprise in the transition to motherhood for me. But when I look back at these awakening moments, I think of my mother often, she's a single mother. She's a professor now of social work, but she was fighting for her PhD at the time when I was born. She as a professor of social work and social change, she often says, the way to change is really pre-consciousness to consciousness, and then the fight for solutions, right, in your own life and society.
Absolutely.
So you're right. Growing from pre-consciousness to consciousness is a very triggering thing to do, because if you don't have the fight for the solutions, then what's the point often of being conscious? They say ignorance is bliss. So I would say for me, it was an understanding that when I was 21, I was going to be president and senator. I promise you, Liz, I thought I could do both because you can legislate till 4 and you can issue your executive orders at night. But I was never going to give up my dream of being a Knick City dancer because, duh, you can just fly Air Force One in on Saturdays and do the 12:30 game, and then you can fly out, and then you can get ready for your state dinners in the airplane. It's a private plane, right? So I was bursting with ideas. I was bursting with creative energy. I was bursting with society telling me I could be anything as a woman. And then realizing, I think 10 years later, or maybe it was more like, I'd say it was 13 years later, because Zach was around 3 at the time when I started to have these realizations when I sat around that circle that I didn't have a name anymore. The realizations that everything I'd been told, I'd been sold a lie. That basically I had 10 years left to live until I was going to be defined by my roles and be erased. My dreams would be erased. Nobody's asking me about me anymore. And I think if you're not aware that this is coming, I like to call myself the ghost of Christmas future, then it can subsume you. You can get confused, gaslighted, hurt, feel lonely, feel like it's only happening to you. And I never want that to happen. I think that's why Motherly is so beautiful. It's this understanding that there's a communal experience out there. And while it may look different for everybody, there are some things that are universal truths. And one of those universal truths is if we don't fight back, at every point in our lives, at some point, every woman you know has been defined by her roles at some point.
Oh, I mean, and we are living through that conscious awakening of women just identifying and peeling back all the layers of the ways that we've been programmed. Even things like how do we use our language, learning to say thanks for your patience versus, oh, I'm so sorry that I'm late, those kinds of things. So we're there, but that's a work in progress, right? So it's why you're writing books. It's why we're talking today. So you wrote a best-selling book already. You have a new book out, but you already had written one called Fair Play, a new book just out called Find Your Unicorn Space. I read both, and I've been reflecting on what ended up to me seeming like one of the common themes, right? Which is that we don't value women's time in our culture, and women don't value their own time. And then you add the responsibilities of motherhood, and there is a crisis of mothers and our time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, thank you. That's such a beautiful way of distilling it. I think that if a lot of people will say, well, why would you write a book about identity and creativity as a sequel? Wouldn't it be something more like Fair Play for Business? Or, I get a lot of calls for work-life integration talks and consulting. Sure. Yes, that's important. We have to burn down and rebuild our workplaces. But why this topic had to come next for me was because I honor my data, Liz. And when I started to understand that we are literally in a time crisis. And what I mean by that is not that, society has made us too busy. What I mean by that is that we have exposed finally a dirty little secret that has been fueling the world's economies. But I'll talk just America specifically. We have literally built our homes, the foundation of America, on the backs of the unpaid labor of women. And that is just not a sustainable foundation of any house. It is crumbling. It is crumbling under individual burnout, but also the realization that we have no safety nets. We don't live in a bouncy house. It's like throwing your kids and being like, have fun, and throwing them out a freaking window onto a concrete floor as opposed to letting them jump in a bouncy house. We are in a place where since the Industrial Revolution and more, but especially since the Industrial Revolution, we have basically said to men, we will guard your time as if it's finite like diamonds, and we will insist that women treat their time as if it's infinite like sand. And we know this because this is not just Eve talking. The data shows us that if women enter a male profession, salaries automatically go down. We say things to women like breastfeeding is free, not motherly, but other people say things to women like breastfeeding is free when it's an 1,800 hour a year full-time job. We then start to internalize the devaluing of our time. And I will ask your listeners, have you ever said to yourself, I do more unpaid labor in childcare because my partner makes more money than me? Or because my job is more flexible? Or because in the time it takes to tell him, her, they what to do, I should do it myself? Or because I'm a better multitasker, I'm wired differently for care? Or because I can find the time and my partner is better at focusing on one task at a time? If you've ever said any one of those things to yourself, that's a toxic time message. They are fundamentally untrue, because at the end of the day, we just get 24 hours in a day. And the more we devalue our own time, we become what I like to say, CIYOO, complicit in your own oppression. And for years, Liz, I was complicit in my own oppression. I guarded Seth's time as if it was the biggest, nicest diamond that ever existed. I never in a million years would have thought to ask him to give up his workout in the morning or to go to work late. I gave up my corporate job, or I was forced out. I built my own practice. I started later so I could drop my kids off at school. Always thinking it was my problem. Never in a million years thinking that Seth would be the one to pick up the pediatrician's call when my kid was sick.
Mm-hmm. You've already mentioned the blueberries, but I just want to get, some of the points of your first best-selling book, Fair Play, out. And I was going to bring up the blueberry incident. So can you walk us through what happened and how that ended up launching just this massive movement around fair play?
And by the way, this is what happens, right? Creativity is iterative. And I bet you, Liz, you never thought, when you're in journalism school, I'm going to be the head of this amazing community of mothers, right? It's not how it works. I didn't have gender division of labor author on my third grade board. Mm-hmm. But the beauty of creativity is that I actually think it becomes iterative. And for me, the change in my life came from the darkest days. And I think that's the other good thing to understand, is that sometimes your lived experiences, whether they're good or bad, they inform what you do next. And so it's called regeneration. That idea that you can use hard times to regenerate is linked to mental and physical health. So I did regenerate. I sort of became a phoenix from the ashes. I never returned to the Nick City Dancer president, Liz. I didn't return to that.
Not yet.
Not yet. But I do think this day, again, the preschool day was one that triggers me for Unicorn Space. But the ultimate day that really, really did change my life was this day that, and Seth is so, I cannot believe I sent you that text. Who knew this was going to happen to our lives? But when Seth sent me, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. I don't really get to unpack it in the beginning of Fair Play because my editor edited it out. But this was the scene, because I think a lot of your listeners can relate. I'm already texting and driving because I'm late to pick up Zach at that toddler transition program I was just telling you about. That lasts 10 minutes, and it's our entire salaries because we don't have a social safety net here. I'm the one tasked to pick him up, of course, because I didn't even think to ask Seth to take on any of those responsibilities at the time. So I'm already texting and driving to get Zach. I'd left my new baby at home, Ben. I had gifts for the newborn baby in the backseat of my car that I was supposed to return. I had a breast pump in the passenger seat of my car. I had a diaper bag in the passenger seat of my car. I had a client contract in my lap because I just said to you I had left the traditional workforce. Now I never say left. I say we were forced out. I was forced out for many different reasons. I had a client contract in my lap because I'd started my own firm. And I remember that day because as Seth is sending me that I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries text, and I'm getting my heart starting to pound. I remember that as my heart was pounding, I was hitting stop signs, and the pen that was in between my legs to help mark up this contract for my new firm, one of my clients, was stabbing me. It was sort of backing up and stabbing me in the vagina. And so I just have this vision of that day of just being stabbed in the vagina by a pen amidst this whirling amount of chaos, to the point where I stopped. I stopped on the side of the road. We live in LA. We don't take traffic lightly here. For me to be late to pick up Zach, something had to be so fundamentally wrong. And what I was thinking that day was, not only was the surprise that I didn't have the career marriage combo, Liz, that I thought I was going to have, and not only that, I was being defined by all these unpaid labor tasks, including, as I said, being the fulfiller of Seth's smoothie needs. But that, how could this happen to me? There was also a blaming and shaming that I had created this, that somehow I didn't fight hard enough for myself or my career. I have a single mother, as I said, who used me as a parental child. So I was more like her partner. I filled out her checks. I would turn in our rent on time so we wouldn't get eviction notices. I was in charge of letting her know my brother couldn't read in 7th grade and picking out a new school for him that would be filling out SSD applications, that's Social Security Disability for him. So I didn't want that life. I wanted an equal partner. I wanted a safety net of somebody to live with who would be an equal partner, Liz. And on top of it, I'm a Harvard-trained mediator. That's the funny part. I'm literally trained in difficult conversations. I live in difficult conversations. I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession. I deal with the most difficult conversations. And still, instead of speaking to Seth, articulating this, understanding this was happening to me, I still ended up alone on the side of the road, completely isolated, feeling like I had nobody I could talk to, and feeling like ultimately it was my fault. And that was it. That was the day my eyes opened and I started to see around me that maybe this wasn't just my problem. And I'll just tell you one last quick story about this breast cancer march I was on. We had 10 women like you, the most amazing, interesting, powerful women, Oscar-winning producer. I had a head of stroke and trauma with me, honoring a friend who had been recently diagnosed right after the blueberries breakdown. And that day of carrying those signs and having this amazing Saturday morning be ruined by the reverse Cinderella by noon, having inundation of texts and phone calls from our partners or the women who came in to help them. And actually, not every one of us is a hetero cisgender partner, but 8 of us are. And getting, when are you coming home from the parade? When is the babysitter coming? Where is the gift? And did you leave me the address for the birthday party? Where did you put Hudson's soccer bag? My favorite was my friend Kate's husband. God bless him. He now is like, I shouldn't have sent that text the same way Seth says it. Because we screenshot it and it's something that lives in my phone.
Yes.
Do the kids need to eat lunch? And
wow.
What was so hard for me that day was understanding that not one of those women said to me, I'm going to turn off my phone and silence my notifications. Every one of them said, I left my partner with too much to do. They wouldn't come with me to lunch. They left. They left me there to go find Hudson's soccer bag and bring a perfectly wrapped gift to a birthday party and to feed their kids lunch. But the last thing I'll say is that was my first act of resistance, Liz, when I went from pre-consciousness to consciousness, because I counted up how many phone calls and texts we had received. And it was 30 phone calls and 46 texts for 10 women over 30 minutes. That was it. You're asking me about my awakening.
Yeah.
I'd say that was the day that I went to consciousness.
Thank you for getting to consciousness. I'm sorry for Seth. I'm sorry about the blueberries. It's been quite a journey since then. It sounds like after you came to consciousness about just your participation in it, you were able to use these negotiating mediator skills to really set for your own marriage a way of finding fairness in the heavy burden of parenting, and not just heavy burden of parenting in a time when we are really renegotiating things. So for those listeners who are there, who realize the mental load of motherhood is too great, what are the steps to have a really constructive conversation and action on how to make things more fair for our listeners?
Well, here's the great news. There's actually a secret formula. There really is one. And it's a practice. So it's like the saying, the good news is eat less sugar. Like, I've never been able to do that. So I understand practices can be hard. But it's actually pretty simple when you boil it down. And remember, I acknowledge we're breathing polluted air. Mm-hmm. So I just established a Fair Play Policy Institute. I am joining the good fight for paid leave and access to universal childcare and the things we need to make it easier for all caregivers. But in the moment that we're in, we still have to breathe that polluted air. We have to breathe. We can't suffocate. And so the non-suffocating formula is 3 things. It's boundaries, systems, and communication. When you have those 3 things in play, and I know this because I have 75 couples I've followed. We have thousands in our CRM database. We probably have the biggest longitudinal study of unpaid labor now in the world. But we had 75 couples that we specifically followed for a documentary through the pandemic. And the ones with those 3 things, because they were on our journey with us, were thriving through this. And I can break those down.
Yeah,
if you
can
want
you
me
talk
to.
about those 3? I think they're really important, and I'm hearing you say that, and I'm thinking, okay, we've gotten better at boundaries. Systems, we're still a hot mess. Communication, we're great. But talk to me about what those 3.
By the
really
way, 2 out of
mean.
3. 2 out of 3
3
is great. 2 out of 3 is great. 3. If you don't have any of them, then it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
You know?
So
and
talk to
that's
me.
where I was in that blueberries breakdown. So let's talk about all 3.
Yeah, let's talk about all 3.
So boundaries we did already. The good news is that we spent the first 15 minutes breaking down this idea that women's time is worthless, right? It's infinite, it's sand. The boundary is not a walk around the block. A boundary is not a drink with a friend. A boundary, and this is what I explore in the whole second book of Unicorn Space. A boundary is being interested in your own life. That's what a boundary is.
And your own life, meaning not your partner, not your kids, not your job, you.
Interested in your own life. And that is hard to separate out when we've been defined by our roles for so long, because being interested in your own life, a lot of people in the beginning of the Fair Play data would say, I just went to my son's basketball game. And I said, no, that's interested in your son's life. And that's great. That's awesome. But that is not what I'm talking about. I'm pretty fulfilled in my work. I'm like, that's awesome. But that's your role as a worker. I'm talking about being interested in your own life outside being a partner and or parent and or professional. And that's why I do have a little bit of an issue with the word fun. And I have an issue with the word passion. And I have an issue with the word hobby. I really like the idea of a unicorn space, because this idea that a boundary is a space, that you're taking up space. But that it's, that space is mythical. It can be magical, but it doesn't exist like a unicorn unless you really can claim it. And I think that I wouldn't necessarily call myself fun, Liz, but I will call myself somebody who now has a lot of dreams and creativity and iterates because I believe in this idea of unicorn space. And so that's a boundary, being interested in your own life. And society doesn't want you to do that.
That's right.
So there's no shame or blame here in this space. This is a space for understanding. And Liz, I will say that your podcast is a unicorn space. It is a beautiful space where you are curious, you connect with others, and then you complete, which is the hardest part. Actually, uploading those things and getting it out in the world is hard. So I appreciate that you have
thank you.
This and you're sharing with the world. So that's a true boundary. That means that you have to believe your time is diamonds. That has to mean that you believe the self-talk is about that you deserve as much time choice as your partner. So boundaries is really the self-talk part of communication. It's understanding that I was able to finally say to Seth, hey, you get 4 hours after our kids go to bed to check SportsCenter and work out and finish a PowerPoint deck, whereas I'm using all my time in service of our household until my head hits the pillow. And that's 2 hours later after your head hits the pillow. And that's fundamentally unfair. And I'm not going to live like that anymore. I deserve as much time choice as you, Seth. So that took a lot of power and patience. And that's what the Fair Play movement is about. It's saying to you, if that self-talk doesn't allow you to get there yet, okay, this is a 101. Just live with that.
So it sounds like the boundaries part is about you setting up boundaries for the world around you. Is systems and communication more about how you negotiate that and navigate that with your partner and family?
Correct. So boundaries is all about, this is the hard part. It's what we spend most of this podcast on, because I wish I could just put the fair play game, Liz, next to Cards Against Humanity and say, go play. But it doesn't work that way. Most people say, I wouldn't even know how to approach this topic. So systems and communication go hand in hand. They are hand in hand. And what I will say, the best thing you can do is understand two things. One thing I can tell you about systems is that everything you'll know about the fair play system, you can find out by asking this question, because I asked it in 17 countries. How did mustard get in your refrigerator? It's such a good question because it dovetails off the most important question of fair play, which is what would happen if we treated our homes as our most important organizations, not corporations, which some people think I'm saying. I don't want to equate it with a capitalist patriarchy. An organization is the way you and people interact over and over again in a sphere, in a group. So that organization that is our home. One man said to me, oh, you mean, Eve, like when me and my partner, we wait to decide who's taking the dog out, right? When it's about to take a piss on the rug. And I said, yeah, that, but whatever that is, but the opposite. So that, but the exact opposite. And a system relies on the fact that decisions are already made for you. You know who's taking the dog out because Tuesdays is your partner's dog day. It is the idea that mustard gets in your refrigerator through 3 steps. The conception that you know that your second son, Johnny, likes mustard because otherwise he won't eat his protein. He'll choke. We get paid big bucks for conception in the business world, new ideas. Then there's the monitoring the mustard for when it runs low and getting stakeholder buy-in for what everybody else needs in the grocery list. That is called planning. Again, big bucks are usually paid for that. And then there's the execution. You can go to the store. And that's often where the biggest fair play systems fail is that women are holding the conception and planning, but then they send their partners to the store for the mustard. And then their partners bring home spicy Dijon every time. And then women will say to me, well, how am I going to trust my husband with my living will, Eve? He can't even bring home the right type of mustard. And that swirling accountability and trust loss in the organization is what ultimately is why we end up in divorce and resentment. We need accountability and trust in our organizations.
And that's what communication is.
That is it.
We have to be able to hear the feedback and absorb the feedback and act on the feedback. And it goes both ways for sure. All right. You've given me some tools to work with around home life. But what I'm so excited to talk to you about is the unicorn space, which does, I know it's not magical, but it does sound magical. And when people hear you describe it, I'm sure, especially 2-3 years into a pandemic, mothers are like, oh yeah, I need that. So can you share more about what this idea is of finding your unicorn space? Why is it so critical for mothers, especially at a time of heavy burden?
Well, I think I'm sort of getting sick of people saying, put your oxygen mask on first, because I think I would say, well, I don't even know how to do that. I have no oxygen here. But this is science-based. This book has 12 expert disciplines in it, because at the end of the day, what we found is that creativity, and how I redefine it as unicorn space, which is the active pursuits of things that make you come alive. That unicorn space, having the metaphorical and or physical space for that is linked to daily flourishing. Now, why that's important, and I'm going to nerd out with you for a little bit, Liz, because I see you go deep with your guests. There is happiness without meaning. That is what a lot of us have gone to in the pandemic. I get it. I've lived on
Netflix.
Hedonistic well-being for me is just sugar. I'm going for my physical today. I'm actually pretty sure that I'm going to be diagnosed as pre-diabetic. I mean, that's in my family. I've lived on just sugar for the past 2 years.
Right.
I get it. Just waiting for your kids to go to bed to doom scroll Twitter and then watch 2 shows on Netflix. Then there's meaning without happiness. And for me, and what the data shows, is that that's often associated with caregiving.
Yeah.
Now,
all joy and no fun.
There is
book.
no, yes, there, and but I quote her, and
yeah, she's
and
great.
I see you, Jennifer Senior. There is a lot of meaning, existential meaning. I don't think women are at loss for existential meaning. But it's not linked to that type of daily flourishing. People in their daily happiness studies would rather be at a root canal than hang out with their toddler. And by people, I mean Eve. I identify with that. Anna, I love you, but I would rather be sleeping on my dentist chair than hang out with you. And so it is this intersection of happiness and meaning that unicorn space occupies. This idea that we need these experiences as our armor, as our umbrella from the rain. So I'll just give you one quick example of this woman, Kat Medina, that I met, that I put her in the book because she so exemplifies what I mean by this armor. So her husband hears her reading to her son one night and says, I just downloaded Audible, and people do this for a living. They read books for a living. She works at Sam's Club as a cashier. Her husband's an auto mechanic, super busy, raising their son, just trying to get by. And then he says this to her. And then serendipitously at Sam's Club with her employee discount, there's a microphone on sale. So she buys the microphone, borrows her husband's laptop, reads Princesses Behaving Badly, a book she had in her house, and uploads it onto some curiosity. She had some curiosity for where to put it out in the world for auditions. A week later, she gets booked as her first audiobook narration. She calls her mom. She said it's the best thing that ever happened to her. She's having this great time. And then shortly after that, she gets a tattoo on her arm that says, reading books is like breathing air. And her mother's like, hold your horses. Like, you've read like one book. Like, what is wrong with you? And her point, which aligns so perfectly with the data, Liz, is that I don't care if I ever read another audiobook. That audiobook that I did can never be taken away from me. That experience can never be taken away from me. And I've recognized that happiness and meaning experiences. When I write a chapter, even if I think it's mediocre, or I'm interviewing someone, I was writing her chapter. The same day I remember Anna takes her foot, swirls me around with some LOL doll, smashes me in the eye. I get this giant black eye. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what? Writing this morning was my armor for dealing with this black eye tonight. Because there has to be these experiences that shelter us, because it's going to keep raining, Liz.
And a big thing you talk about in Find Your Unicorn Space is how in motherhood, it feels like there are no boundaries with our time, with our space, with our bodies. The only person who can make boundaries is us. The only one who can carve out those unicorn spaces is us. I'm hoping you can list off a few unicorn spaces of people in your community to really start to inspire our listeners of what this could mean for them.
Can we play a game?
Sure. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. I have a game. Let's play. Let's see if I feel like I messed up all my cards here. Okay. Let's play for you. I mean, I'm attributing your podcasting as one of your unicorn spaces, there's no fair playbook that comes out without a card game. So
of course,
these will be, I'm happy to send them to you and we can prototype.
Very cool.
When they're out of prototype mode. But I'm going to read you some cards. And then what I'm going to do, and this is something that your listeners can do, and we can send them a PDF of this. But what they can do, and what's so fun about this card game, is I will read off these unicorn space ideas. And then I want to know what resonates with you just off the top of your head. Yeah. This is not your actual unicorn space. As we said, these are iterative. This is just to get inspired.
Yeah.
But then I will remix one card with your card based on what you tell me. Okay, so I'm going to read you some, and you tell me just what resonates with you. Okay. Sports with I'm going to read them all. Sports with wheels, triathlon, sports with balls, design, performing, travel and culture, racing, rhetoric, that's speech, debate, and politics, martial arts, dance, animals, raising, writing, and showing, circus, theater production, memories and archiving, snow sports. Okay, let's keep going. Outdoors, water sports, storytelling, genealogy and lineage, spiritual wellness, yoga, religion, retreats, other worldly pursuits, tarot, astrology, magic, etc. painting, planting, gardening, farming, art, music, stitching and needles, woodworking, building and DIY, axe throwing, metallurgy, restoration and renovation, baking, photography, florals, pottery, beauty, arrows and axes, video games, coding, teaching, researching and learning, finding and foraging, and or event planning. So tell me which card stood out for you?
So beauty has been on my mind for months, that I'm noticing that creating beauty, physical beauty, the mood of beauty, that makes me feel so alive. And it doesn't have a purpose in a way that I can say, like, how do you monetize it? But it just makes me feel alive. And like it's a piece of me that's missing.
But I love what you just did, because I almost think you did that on purpose, where you had to qualify your love of something beauty by saying, but it doesn't have a purpose because I can't monetize it. Mm-hmm. That's what we do.
Yes.
Anybody that I know who, even when they pick a card now, there's always a qualifier. Well, I would love it, but I'm not sure what I would do with it. There's some sort of qualifier, because we're actually not used to talking about things that we would do just for us.
Right. Well, you brought up just, we live in capitalism, this era where art time is precious. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, how would I make money doing that? Well, that's not the point.
No, it's definitely not the point. So
but
tell me, I want to hear more about it. Tell me though, give me a beauty story. Because what were you thinking of when you were thinking? Is there something that you brought beauty
Today I bought myself flowers, and not just any flowers. I ordered from a company that I really, really love. And every time I order, or someone gets it, typically a friend will get me these flowers for my birthday, and I like arranging them and the vase, and maybe I break it up in different rooms. And I just, flowers for me are very poetic, and I love them. So that's
I want to give
example.
you a floral arranging class. We're going to all get together and we'll give you a floral arranging class. So I'm actually going to combine. So what we do, so the way this game works is that there's a uni. So Liz would be our uni, and then your friends sit around with you, and you all pitch a Shark Tank style to combine one card with your card, and then whichever one you pick, that becomes your spiritual friend, and they follow up with you. So for example, my friend Monica, who's an organizer, she picked art as her card. One of our friends paired florals with her art and saying, you were an organizer. A lot of us can't afford professional organizing. Could you do a blog post about how you would use florals in each room to make your space look more organized? So that was one pitch. My pitch to her, because we're both angry about what's happening with reproductive rights, was could I combine axe throwing with art? I want to take her to one of those axe throwing places that are popping up everywhere. I want her to draw something that allows her to take her rage out. And then we're going to throw axes at it. So it becomes a mixed media piece. And I want to call it rage art. So she didn't pick my rage art, even though I think my rage art was amazing. She picked my friend's pitch of using florals. So I'm going to pitch something to you. And again, if we had more people, you'd get more pitches. But I'm actually going to combine pottery with your love of beauty and florals. Because I think it could be really fun to take a class. And I don't mean just color me mine where you just paint it. Actually taking a pottery class, or just even doing one thing, going to a pottery studio and making a vase that you then that you make beautiful, that you make in the glazed colors you love. And then you put special flowers in there to remind you that you love beauty, and that's your reminder to yourself every day.
Yeah, I love it completely. And I thank you for giving me permission to spend my own time, create space for that. It's been on my mind, but I haven't done it yet, which I'm sure is a common theme.
Absolutely. And by the way, that gets to this framework. We have a secret formula for thriving in the home: boundary, systems, and communication. And by the way, you're a great interviewer, because I've actually never gotten both secret formulas out in one podcast. So we've covered a lot of themes here.
Good.
We're at like 201 or 301 now. But the secret formula for creative thriving that happens in the second part of the book, because I had to honor the data about why it's so hard. So half of Unicorn Space is about why it's so hard. The fun half of the book is about the secret formula of curiosity plus connection plus completion. Now, in your unicorn space podcasting world, you've iterated in that circle and cycle many times. So that's a robust unicorn space. In a more nascent unicorn space, like your love of florals, possibly floral arranging, which we're going to make that yours for this purpose of this podcast. You may just be in the nascent phase of curiosity. So maybe it's literally you go to your local bookstore or Barnes and Noble and you ask them for the floral arranging section. It would be fun just to bring home 5 or 6 books, sit on your floor with your kids and just say, what flowers are interesting to you? Which ones look beautiful to you? Which ones are seasonal to where I live? It could be fun. That's another one. I could combine beauty with foraging, because that could be fun for you to do a foraging trip, a local foraging trip with your kids to forage for wildflowers.
Definitely. Yeah, by the way, I love doing things with my kids that I want to do. Like we go to the restaurants I want to go to.
Love it.
That's one of my tricks too. It also gets to this idea of flow and the right we have to get into flow. I interviewed maybe 100 women, amazing women on this podcast. And many of them frequently talk about their capacity for multitasking. I'm a horrible multitasker, and I actually hate multitasking.
Thank God, by the way. Thank God.
So hearing that there were downsides to multitasking. Also, there's oppression within the idea that women should be good at multitasking. Seeing that in your book was kind of a relief to me. Because I find when I'm a mother and I'm fully present with my kids, that's where I want to be. And when I'm working at work, I really don't want to hear my kid. I want to be in my state of flow for work. You've presented these unicorn spaces as spaces where we must be in flow. Can you talk about motherhood and flow and why it's so important?
Liz, I honestly feel like the word multitasking is as bad as the word guilt and shame. I think it has allowed us to take pride in things that we shouldn't take pride in. And I will say that you asked me earlier about times in my life where I started to get to consciousness. One of the most triggering days in my fair play research was sitting down with a neuroscientist, one of the top in the world, that I had access to because of my clients, the HBO show Succession types that fund his work. And he was willing to sit down with me when I asked him, are women better multitaskers? Because that was my toxic time message, that somehow that was a superpower. And I think that's a Gen X thing. I'm hoping that, millennials and Gen Z don't understand how toxic this is. And he looked at me and he said, better multitaskers. Do you mean from a neurological perspective or from a neuroscience perspective or from a cultural perspective? And I'm like, duh. I'm not asking about women's culture and feminism. I'm asking about the neurobiology behind it. And he looked at me and said, no, there's no gendered difference in the brain for how people multitask. He's like, but culturally, if I could convince you that you're better at wiping asses and doing dishes, how great for my flow state and my leisure time and my ability to tinker and create and ideate, because that's what he does. He's a researcher. And when you're a researcher, he says you absolutely cannot have interruptions. You have to protect your time. Liz, it was a stereotype of just, a blonde woman crying in this man's office. It's just everything I didn't want to be in front of this, serious researcher in a lab coat. I was so sad that day. So sad. I was like, imagine taking pride in wiping asses and doing dishes. So yes, the opposite of that pride in the patriarchy, I'll call it, is the idea of uninterrupted attention. Attention is a weapon. It's a weapon that the powers that be know that we have, and keeping people small that are marginalized, like women, people of color, out of attention is how people stay in power. I can't have attention, Liz, with my kids thinking I'm a good multitasker. I can't have the best ideas in the world if I don't protect my attention. I can't find attention, Liz, if I'm starving. And for years, I was starving. trying to, be some version of my body that it didn't want to be. So that is something very powerful. It's hard to hear, but I will say that a flow state, which again is easy for a white man to write. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is the ultimate white man, and may he rest in peace. He just passed away. But often it's taken by white men and said, duh, of course we need flow states. You just need 2 uninterrupted days a week, right? You saw that one of the men I interviewed on a plane said to me, he has all this uninterrupted attention and time. No, it doesn't happen like that for women. We have to reclaim it. We have to recognize that our weapon, our most important weapon, our most important power is wrapped up in how we pay attention. And that is a flow state. A flow state is an uninterrupted attention for something that makes you come alive, that you love.
What you're describing is hard for people to carve out or even to give themselves permission to do. But I buy in that there are major benefits. Can you describe what some of those benefits are when you're able to identify that unicorn space, to get into that flow state, to share whatever that creation is with the world? I think it will help our listeners to understand what they get by doing the difficult work of finding that space and demanding it from their people.
Well, it reminds me of the cat Medina, when I said to her, well, what was life before you read books, if reading books is like breathing air? She said, well, what do you think the opposite of breathing air is? I think what Ali Wong says is a joke, right? Women wear diamonds because we need the sparkle to compensate for the light inside of us that has died. This is so the number one word that women attach to being a multitasker in their roles as parents and or partners and or professionals, Liz, across socioeconomic spectrums and across 17 countries, was drowning. In my word cloud, that was the word that came up. And when I unpacked that word and went back to those women and non-binary individuals and people who identified as women, they said that they unpacked it as 2 words in a word cloud that I was like, oh my God, I never want to see these 2 words next to each other ever again. And they were overwhelmed and bored.
Right.
So is that the life you want to live? What stakes are we having? You have one life. This is not a privileged conversation, because actually the more that people identified in the 9.9%, the less likely they were telling me that they were thriving. The failure to thrive is not okay. I cannot have you live in a languishing state, because then you don't create, you don't ideate. We don't have women's economic security. We lose our power. It becomes a world that of status quo. We need to be the opposite of overwhelmed and bored. We have to flourish in our daily lives. And the only thing I can tell you is that it's not optional. This is linked to the fundamental basics of your mental health and your longevity. I will argue that I think it's more important than exercise in terms of your mental health and your longevity. Being interested in your own life is the key. It's the key to, and sometimes, Liz, it's just starting with Motherly. It's just starting in a community of women to understand that this is hard. Sometimes that's all you have to do, is just start where you are.
Thank you. This was all true before a pandemic, but then we had a pandemic, and whatever the word is beyond burnout, there's a place, and that is where millions of mothers are. But yet I know in the book you write that having this creative, beautiful, fun space is maybe even more critical during the hard times. Can you talk about that?
It actually is. And I have a really robust data set of essential workers. And ironically, NPR just read an article saying, it's so weird, these essential workers are returning to creativity. And I'm like, yes, of course they are. Because it's in the data, NPR. But Marie Forgard, there's all these different researchers that show how important creativity is in times of disruption. That the constraints actually lead to bursts and bursts of creativity. Because I think what people realize is that the other types of capital, whether it's financial capital or extrinsic milestones, are just not working for them anymore. So the return to the creative capital is something that almost happens because of these constraints. So that's why I actually think this is a great time. I had this really fun, I did a radio tour yesterday through the different NPRs, and I will say Texas was my favorite. I was surprised. But I had this man come on. He's like, my name is David, and I love Jay-Z and Beethoven. I'm going to start playing music again. And this amazing nurse who is saying, she works in this industrial hospital that's all metal and modern and fluorescent lights. So what she does is she got a Nikon camera from Costco, and she takes one picture of wildlife in the morning on her way to work. So she'll stop, and maybe it was a leaf, a foliage that was on the floor, or just a tree in the sky. She takes one picture at lunch, and she takes one picture now after work. And then she just posted them to Instagram. I just started following her Instagram. So the beauty is that in constraints, what we can start to do is build this unicorn space into things we already do. We can ritualize it. If you take a walk in the morning to walk your dog, do you bring your Nikon camera with you? Do you start to, I will give you a challenge, Liz. Every time you go out for a walk, can you bring home one flower, even if it's a weed? Do you find one on your walk? Can you pick it from a neighbor's yard or whatever it is? I guess Beauty and the Beast style. My daughter never wants to do it because she's afraid of picking flowers after Beauty and the Beast. But this idea of starting to slowly incorporate these things into your routines can also be a really healthy way to do it small. Another great way is to unpack why you want to share. That's how my friend Aisha got into Hindu astrology, because she realized for her the motivation for sharing was she really wanted to pass something down from her grandmother in India to her daughter. And this reading charts, Hindu astrology, was the way she decided to pass down the lineage.
Yeah. I found that example so meaningful to your point earlier.
Yeah. So why you share, for me, I love the idea of paying it forward, of learning something new and saying I can translate this for people who may not know this research. So that's my motivation, that paying it forward. Other people's motivations are that they're great accountability partners, or they want accountability from somebody else to run that marathon, to share themselves with somebody else, to say you can do it. Robin Arzon from Peloton said that her motivation is the accountability partner for hundreds of thousands of people on their Peloton. So unpacking your motivation for why you would want to share yourself with the world is another great way to get unstuck if the idea of incorporating into your daily routine doesn't resonate.
I want to talk about one more concept here that kind of hits on both fair play and unicorn spaces, which is the idea of flexibility. And I actually call it the idea of flexibility. There is a real downside to mothers having flexible careers. And I know I've lived that already. I've already been there, learned that. And again, you talk in the book about how motherhood is this role that sort of intrinsically doesn't have any boundaries. You mentioned how you like to say that you were pushed out of your job rather than left, because it was the conditions of our society that made it impossible for you. Why is flexibility that sort of double-edged sword for women?
Well, it's extremely dangerous if you're living in a pre-consciousness world of thinking your time is infinite. Because a lot of things happen, and flexibility is fantastic if you're in a workplace where you know how to fair play before it. But flexibility without fair play is just a ploy for women to lose their economic power. What happens with flexibility is, as I like to call it, we become the case of the 1099, right? We think we're empowered, but we end up just taking on more unpaid labor and childcare because we're closer to the home. We're the ones who picks up the phone when the school calls.
Yep.
And that flexibility is linked to a real economic risk, Liz. And so I'm not saying that we all need to be in these ideas. Everybody needs to be flexible. Mind you, I am fighting for predictable flexibility in all workplaces so that everybody can take advantage of it. The problem is when it becomes just a women's issue.
Exactly.
That women are the ones who take flexibility. It is linked to severe economic risks for us. And so I want you to take flexibility with a grain of salt. Flexibility is only as good as understanding that when you talk to your partner, just because my job is more flexible, I am not taking on more unpaid labor and childcare. And if you do, you make it extremely intentional for what cards you're going to hold, what cards your partner is still going to hold. Because what happens is the avalanche of unpaid labor makes your job even more flexible or not. And then you're in a place where it's worse.
It is worse
It's
because you're
worse.
working more hours, but you're making less money, so you can't afford more help, and you're burned out in every direction. You feel more conflicted. You feel like you're supposed to be on a work call and preschool pickup and all of the above. But
I did it. You've done it. I mean, that was what I did. That was the law firm. That was the pen stabbing me in the vagina.
Well, and that was me 10 years ago, too, thinking I have to choose a flexible career because I want to be a mother. But thankfully, we're also living through this remote revolution and good things being born of this horrible crisis of the pandemic. People are reimagining, what does work look like? What does my partner's job look like? What do we want as a family? What is possible for us? And also how to literally redefining our spaces. Like right now I'm next to my treadmill in my office where my husband works during the day. And so I think thinking flexibly, so to speak, about being intentional to the consequences of how we choose to work. Also, how we choose to invest in our own well-being, demanding and cultivating those unicorn spaces. This is a time, I think, especially for women's experiences and points of view to come out and to be at the center of the conversation because we've been burdened and it's time to be unburdened.
Well, that's so powerful because I think what you're getting at also is that if you think of flexibility as being tied to the three most toxic words that I think I've ever heard in my data over and over again, the three most toxic words that I've ever heard are, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Figure it out just means that there's no systems in place, that gendered assumptions are going to dictate how you make your decisions. So if that's what flexibility means to you, then we need to burn flexibility along with guilt and shame. Instead, we can replace it with a flexible life, understanding that the life-changing magic is not organizing our junk drawer. It's in long-term thinking. To understand we don't have to do what everybody told us to do. I don't have to be a corporate lawyer because that's what everybody else told me to do. I can have a flexible life. I can iterate. I can change because there's power in that. But it's understanding that it's not the flexibility of figure it out. It's the flexibility of I'm going to give myself permission to live a long life and to iterate and dream on what that life can look like and be.
So I'm curious for you, what are your unicorn spaces?
Oh my God, I have so many now.
Yay.
It's like when, an object in motion stays in motion, Liz, and I was an object at rest for so long. I would say the return to dance is what I talk about in the book because that was the most fun with my cousin. I start off in the book with her dumping a guy on Tinder because he asked her what he would do for fun. And the return to dance for us has been embarrassing for our kids and really, really fun.
TikTok, right?
Yes, TikTok. We haven't, we've done it just for our like a private friends, but we will release a video, I think, just to embarrass everybody. But the other one actually that's been percolating in my mind is my self-care is reading thrillers. I have probably read every single thriller, and most of them have dead women at the middle of them, and they're even if women write them, they're kind of sexist. I have this dream of writing a thriller series with this genetic detective at the middle of it because I just read about a real one in the Times. She started off as a Barbie model at Mattel, and then she became a mother and then an amateur sleuth that turned into the most important genetic detective that helps using DNA solve murders.
Wow.
And I have this idea for a murder mystery. So that's sort of where I am. I've never written a thriller.
Love that.
I don't know how. I don't know. But I saw a masterclass online called How to Write Thrillers. So I thought maybe I'd sign up for that masterclass.
Love that. Well, I think you've sufficiently convinced our listeners that they need to play fair in their marriages and motherhood, their partnerships. And I know I want more unicorn spaces in my life, but a big part of that is communicating our needs to our partners, our family, our support systems. What does that look like? What tips do you have when the next step you need to take is saying, hey, I need Saturday morning off? How do you do that?
Such a good question, because it's such an important question that my editor said, you really want to add 2 chapters on communication in a book about creativity? And I said, yes, actually I do. I really do. Because what it comes down to is asking for what we need is a huge hurdle. It is a huge hurdle. And here's why. My favorite data, Liz, was surveying 1,000 people on social media, asking what their most important practice was. Sometimes I like to ask vague questions just to see what I get. So most people were like, I need more information. But a lot of people said, meditation or exercise. Not one in 1,000, which was on purpose, and I was hoping this would happen, said communication. So what I'm here to say to you, and what I can leave you with, is a gift of understanding that if you can start viewing your communication as your most important practice of your life is going to change. It will change. Because what happens is most people think, when I ask them, why do you communicate? The answers I get are, well, because I had to tell him, obviously, to take the kids' snow boots to school, or I had to tell my boss I was running late on the call because I got another call from my colleague. It was all of these answers that were means to an end. No one told me they communicate to practice how they communicate. So I'm here to tell you that a communication practice means that you'll get it wrong, just like any practice, but that it does make progress. And the 3 steps to a communication practice are: 1, recognizing our vulnerabilities. Mine is my tone. My friend Claudia, she calls herself the verbal assassin, where it's not her tone. She says things really calmly, but she says things like, wow, you turned into the worst father that's ever existed in the entire world. What a strange thing to happen to you. I'm so sad for you, right? So understanding our vulnerabilities is number 1. Number 2 is recognizing that most of those vulnerabilities, especially after kids, come because we're giving feedback in the moment.
Right.
And it is you didn't put
the reaction.
The reaction, the trigger, the resentment, builds up and then it comes out in that moment. Or as my friend said, I don't communicate. And then she tells me she dumps wet clothes on her husband's pillow when he forgets to put them in the dryer. I'm like, okay, you're communicating in the moment. And then the third piece of the practice would be, if you can really practice number 2, which has been the hardest part in my life, harder than don't eat sugar, harder than anything, is this wait for it. Being able to hold my tongue, Liz, in the moment, understanding that when emotion is high, cognition is low, and I say bad things. That the third piece is this check-in idea. That even before you start to say things in that check-in, just the idea of, hey, things have been so chaotic lately. Could we try to take a pint of cookie dough and just spend 10 minutes together, just checking in every single night at the same time over our day? Let's make it a practice. Let's light a candle so we remember to do it. That practice of checking in allows you to communicate those things that you were going to when you were about to scream or be a verbal assassin in a time where your emotion is low and your cognition is high. And so those are gifts that we can start doing today. Recognizing communication as a practice and understanding the 3 elements of that practice are understanding our own vulnerabilities, recognizing most of them come from feedback in the moment, and then ultimately setting a time to check in with the people that you care about, because it allows you, and the data shows this, you are able to say more vulnerable things, to ask for boundaries when you have a deliberate practice with somebody of constant communication.
We are just starting a weekly, spouse summit on Sundays to talk about that. So we're like,
oh my God, if Motherly could do that, if you could do a check-in time for people where they just are sort of they know other people are checking in, like even like, it's like the emergency broadcast where it's like, zzz, you're on the emergency. Like I almost see like a Motherly community, like here's your emergency broadcast 4 to 4:10 on Sundays. But the idea of being able to encourage people to communicate on a regular basis, Liz, oh my God, it's that's revolutionary.
Well, at Motherly, we believe that motherhood brings out our superpowers. Motherhood certainly has brought a lot of incredible work out of you, but I'm curious, what is your superpower, Eve?
attention. I will end with that word. Clarity. Clarity and attention are my superpowers that I've been able to really start to return to my values, Liz. And I will say that for a long time, the clarity of understanding I was living under the value, a very Jewish value of obligation, being able to set that value aside and say, I'm no longer obligated to wipe asses and do dishes anymore, and to bring in the other values, the clarity that I want to live a life of justice and community, has been a superpower for me to return to my values through my clarity. I'd say it's almost like that superpower of like X-ray vision, X-ray vision into who I am. I was able to tap into that as I was writing the second book.
We love it. We're thrilled that you did. Eve Rodsky, thank you so much for joining us on the Motherly Podcast today.
Thank you, Liz.